So I'm really honored to introduce our afternoon plenary speaker before our plenary panel, which will be local, to reflect upon the local context of what Chris is going to share with us. So Chris Naira is from the LEAD, National Support Bureau. He's the director there. LEAD stands for Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. How many of you have heard of LEAD? Oh, that makes me so happy. That's great. We are trying to build a LEAD in Hawaii. You will see a fact sheet in your packet. We have about 20 or so agencies now as part of our LEAD Hui, and we really are looking for more folks, so please come find me or email me. My email's on that if you want to join the LEAD movement in Hawaii. I'm going to let Chris describe what LEAD is, the data that supports it. He's a long-term harm reductionist that came from the front line. We've actually known each other longer than probably both of us want to admit. And by coming from the front line, he did syringe exchange work. He did frontline harm reduction work. And now he's able to work on a policy level to really address the larger issues that are affecting our community and work to take a promising practice, which LEAD is, to turn it into an evidence-based practice, which I don't think we're that far away from that. So he's going to share with you for about 25 minutes, and then we have a fantastic local panel facilitated by our own Kat Brady, new recipient of our award, who will then talk about, well, what might this mean in Hawaii for homelessness, mental health, sex work, and substance use. So with that, please give us a warm welcome to Chris.
Thanks, Heather, and thanks everyone for being here. I gotta say, it's a real pleasure to be here, not least of which because it was 18 degrees when I left home in Seattle yesterday morning, so I'm like totally in heaven. And also, this is my 50th state. I've been waiting years to get to Hawaii. So actually, I'm going to start things out by following up on something that Dr. Hart was talking about this morning, which is sort of the disease model of addiction. And I am not really a particular fan of the disease model of addiction. And one of the reasons for that is, because I'm not a scientist, is that if addiction is a disease, I am struck by the fact that it's the only disease that I'm aware of where the patient is expected to give up the symptoms of their disease before they get treated for it.
Okay.
So imagine if someone went into a doctor with the hypertension that the doctor thought was really due to behavioral health issues, and the doctor said to that person, well, I want you to stop eating meat and stop eating cheese and start walking for at least 45 minutes a day. And once you do that for a month, come back in and I'll check your hypertension again, and then maybe we'll think about putting you on blood pressure medication, right? That's not the way the medical model would work. And that is the way the disease model of addiction seems to work. So that's just sort of a preface behind this. So law enforcement assisted diversion. I'm not going to go into like all sorts of gory, grimy details here. I just want to give you guys a sense of what this program is, where it came from, and what it's teaching us. So there is, and I could go on for the entire time that I have about the history of how LEAD came into being in Seattle. It took a long time, but the short version of this is that there were years and years of litigation in court over racial disparity on drug arrests in Seattle. So in a city where 8% of the population was African American, north of 60% of those being arrested for low-level, street-level drug crimes were black. And so there was lots and lots of litigation over this. And at the end of one round of litigation in 2005, the person who was then captain of narcotics for the Seattle Police Department was in a meeting room. NAACP is in there, ACLU is in there, public defenders, all sorts of civil rights activists, and we're having this conversation, and finally Captain Brown said, look, assuming everything you guys say is true, what would you have us do differently? And he was met with the sound of crickets, because we had no answer for him. We had two answers, both of them very rhetorical, one of which was end the war on drugs, which was slightly above the pay grade of a captain in a mid-sized police department stuck out in the far reaches of the west coast of the United States. The second answer was, start arresting white drug users, like 4 to 5 times as many as you're answering that you're doing now. So that didn't seem to work either. So that forced those of us who were criticizing the police to like start talking to each other about what would we have them do differently. And the two things that we started focusing on was, what if, given that we are living in a drug war paradigm, what if we could change what is almost uniformly a negative interaction between police and street-level drug users, and change that into something that was potentially positive, certainly for the drug user and perhaps even for the police officer. And then coming from that, what if we could make arrest the strategy of absolute last resort for the Seattle Police Department? So focusing on those two things, we started talking about doing a diversion at the point of contact between people on the street and police officers. And so we talked to the cops, we talked to the prosecutors, we got everyone locally involved in criminal justice on board with saying yes, that they would agree to do a diversion right at the point of contact out on the street. That was fairly easy. Getting them to buy into a diversion that was absolutely harm reduction based, with no expectation of, let alone requirement for, abstinence, that people would be able to keep using after their diversion and still get services. That took a little bit longer for them to buy into, but what finally ended up getting to it was a realization that the status quo was broken and that it really wasn't meeting anyone's need. The police department was pretty upfront about that. It wasn't working for them at all, and they were willing to give something else a try. So then we started talking about, okay, who would be eligible for this and how would the program work? So when we first started thinking of it, it was designed as a post-arrest pre-booking diversion program. And the idea was and we set eligibility criteria. And the eligibility criteria would be possession, and this is critical, or sales of 3 grams or less of drugs. And we're not talking about marijuana. We're talking about heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine. And so the idea was that the cop could actually have grounds to make an arrest of that individual for possession or sales of 3 grams or less. And just I'll tell you a side story here about the debate that goes back and forth. So we were having the debate over eligibility criteria, and by now Captain Brown had become captain of the West Precinct, which covers all of downtown Seattle, which is where we were going to pilot Lee. So we're having this debate over eligibility criteria, and I'm like, well, you know, 3.5 grams is an 8-ball. Right. And if it actually has a name out on the street, it must be like a unit of some significance. So let's make 3.5 grams the cutoff. And Captain Brown turns to me and he goes, Chris, that's a lot of dope. And I'm thinking to myself, and 3 grams isn't a lot of dope? We're like actually arguing over half a gram here? But I'm like, okay, I'll let it go. I'll let it go. And it's like, you know, I'll take 3 grams. That's not bad. So anyway, so we came up with this, that the possession of sales of 3 grams or less, the officer would actually have grounds to make an arrest for the person. And then they would run a records check on them and see if they had a disqualifying prior offense. And they could definitely have prior convictions for drugs, or shoplifting, or car prowls, or any other sorts of stuff like that that was associated with substance use. They just couldn't have like violent offenses, murder, rape, arson, armed robbery, things like that. So if the person met the eligibility criteria, didn't have a disqualifying prior offense, the officer was empowered to say to the person, I got 2 doors. Door number 1 is the King County Jail. Door number 2 is a referral to case management. If you take the referral to case management and complete an intake with the case manager, this arrest does not exist, and I go away. And so if the person says, well, yeah, I'd like the referral to a case manager, the officer calls a case manager, the case manager shows up like within 15 minutes, and it's a direct handoff. And at that point, the case manager does a couple of things with the individual. First of all, like a brief triage. What is it that you need right at this particular moment to not go back out to the street corner where you were just arrested? And does that, like, do you need a place to stay tonight? Do you need bus fare? Do you need clothing? Do you need food? Just basics, survival stuff. What is it you need? And then the second thing the person does is, where can I find you again? Do you have a phone number? Do you have an address? And for us in Seattle, this is really critical because over 80% of the people that are being diverted into LEAD are homeless at the time of their diversion. So being able to find the person again, where they hang out, is really important. So that brief triage session, that starts a clock ticking. And they have 30 days from that moment to do about an hour-long psychosocial intake with the case manager. If they complete that intake, that is the only requirement that that person has to do. If they do that intake, that arrest will never get filed on by the prosecutor. For the very few individuals that we come in contact with who do not have prior records, this is actually, they could walk away from it without having any criminal record at all. I gotta say, after 5.5 years, that's like 5 people. Because the overwhelming majority of our folks have lots of prior stuff. But adding one more to it, at least they get out of that. So again, like I say, it's a harm reduction-based program. There is no expectation or requirement for abstinence. So what the case managers do is work with the individual around prioritizing that person's need. What is it that they want? And as I said before, 80% of our folks are homeless. 56% don't even have legal ID. So getting legal identification is actually one of the first things that they identify. And just to give you an example of how screwy the system that we created is, so several years ago, the Social Security office in Seattle was moved into a secure building. You have to have identification to get into the building that you might want to go to recreate having identification. So the case managers have to go there, go upstairs, get a security guard, have the security guard come back downstairs, escort the person back upstairs, just to go through this process. And as an example of how the dynamics between the police and the people they come in contact with have changed, when the police officers discovered this, they were furious about it. And so what they started doing was they started going to the jail and getting the person's booking photo and giving it to them, so they had government-issued photo identification that they could use to start recreating that stuff. So anyway, so the needs of the folks that we work with are really, really significant, and nothing is held over that person's head. If the person says, well, I'd like to get a job, the case manager internally may be thinking, yeah, and you're doing 4 bags a day of dope. How realistic is it that you're going to be able to get and keep a job? But that's what the individual themselves has said that they want to do. The case manager will work with the person, and then frequently what happens is they themselves will say, I'm not really being able to keep doing the job effectively or hold it down while I'm getting high. Can you get treatment? And so what we've discovered over 5 years of doing this is that a fairly significant amount of people, close to 60%, end up saying that they want to go into treatment and do go into treatment. But it's after they've gotten housing and their ID back and their teeth fixed and had all sorts of other medical appointments and issues taken care of for them. So let's go back to where I started sort of midway here, about when we originally designed it. The idea was it would be post-arrest, pre-booking diversion. So all sorts of stuff started happening relatively rapidly after we started doing LEAD. And this gets to the police side of things, of how LEAD has actually changed police officer thinking and has actually gotten us to the point where that point of contact between an officer and an individual on the street actually does result in better outcomes for people than it did before, and where it changes people's thinking and perception, and arrest has actually become the strategy of last resort in Seattle, to the point where drug arrests basically do not happen any longer. And so one of the first things that happened was about 3 or 4 weeks into doing LEAD, we started getting feedback from police officers who were saying, you know, we're out here every day. There are folks that we know that we might have known for 20 years. We know what high school they went to. We know their family members. We know what diseases they have. Why in the world do we have to wait until we arrest that person in order to divert them into this program with all these rich social services? That makes no sense at all. And so the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back here was about a few weeks after they started saying this, a couple of officers came to our operational work group meetings. We have these meetings a couple times a month where case managers, police, and prosecutors actually sit and do case staffing. So we're in one of these meetings. A couple of the bike cops talk about having been out at Westlake Plaza a few days before. It's a park in downtown Seattle. They're there. This woman comes up to them and says, it's today a green light day. So we had this weird thing when we started of filtering. We only did LEAD on certain days due to resource limitations and evaluation issues and stuff like that. So we had red light days where it was criminal justice system as normal, green light days where you could get into LEAD. Wow. So they're out there at Westlake Park. This woman comes up to them and says, hey, it's today a green light day. And they're like, how the hell does she even know our own internal terminology about this? So they're mystified by that. They're somewhat gobsmacked, and one of them kind of stutters out, well, yeah. And so she says, wait right here. She comes back a couple minutes later, opens up her hand, and she's got a couple of rocks of cocaine in it. And she's like, you arrest me so I can get into LEAD. And we're like, yeah, that really makes very little sense at all. So, I mean, that's just creating dysfunctional behavior where we are trying to get rid of dysfunctional behavior. And so the fact that the police were actually asking for this and willing to make referrals without having it be based on arrest was great. And so we, at that point, initiated what we call social contact diversions, which is where police, if they come in contact with people, are allowed to offer them a diversion. The other thing about this is, and I won't get into all the gory details over this, but the cops were really kind of conservative over eligibility criteria for an arrest-based diversion, and this really has to do with liability. And I just feel shortly, their worst-case scenario was on a Tuesday, they divert someone into LEAD. And on a Thursday, that person robs a bank and shoots the teller. And everyone knew that on a Friday, in the largest typeface that the Seattle Times owns, the front page of the newspaper was going to read, police release violent felon. And that was going to kill the program. I gotta say, 5.5 years into this, 5 years and 3 months, never happened, not even remotely close. We've had like one minor bad incident in the entire time where someone was having a bad day and punched their case manager. That's the worst that has happened, which is really quite remarkable when you think about it. So anyway, but when it came to social contact, there's no liability issue, there's no custodial issue. So they were willing to refer other types of folks into the program. And we've seen this happen as LEAD has expanded. So one of the things that we were not prepared for in Seattle was we started in October of 2011, and by like April or May of 2012, we were fielding phone calls from folks in other jurisdictions about wanting to do LEAD. And the first place to end up doing it was Santa Fe, New Mexico. So Santa Fe started a couple of years ago now, and one of the things that was really surprising to us was that Santa Fe really sort of pushed the envelope from what Seattle had done. They looked at what Seattle had done and said, okay, we're going to take this a step further. So in Santa Fe, their issue was not open-air drug markets and drug dealing and consumption the way we have it in Seattle. Their issue was a large amount of property crime associated with people getting money to support their habits, like car prowls, mail theft, residential burglary. And so Santa Fe said, look, that's who we're going to divert. We're going to divert people that are engaged in these low-level acquisitive crimes in order to support their drug habit. And then to move things even further, Albany, New York, which started back in April of last year, The police chief in Albany told his officers, he's like, you know what? I don't want you to tell me what you would divert for. I want you to tell me what you wouldn't divert for. And anything that's not on that list, you divert someone into lead. And so Albany's eligibility criteria basically is any crime that in the officer's opinion is due to substance use, mental health, or poverty.
Wow.
Right? I mean, that's like a pretty strange thing for a police department to do. And so that's what they have implemented. So where we're at in this space right now is that several other cities have adopted LEAD. In Seattle, and to go back to, again, to something that Dr. Hart was talking about this morning, the difference between anecdote and empirical data. So LEAD was anecdotally and qualitatively so successful in Seattle that neighborhoods, we piloted in this one small neighborhood called Belltown. So the neighborhoods that were adjacent to Belltown started going to the city council and the mayor and saying, hey, how come Belltown has LEAD and we don't?
Yeah.
And so they put enough pressure based on what their observations were on the Seattle City Council to expand LEAD. And then what's happened is every time we move to a new neighborhood, the next neighborhood over starts saying, hey, we want LEAD also. Fortunately, we were lucky enough to have a team of independent evaluators in Seattle who were independently funded. So neither the evaluators nor the agency that funded them had any skin in the game as to whether LEAD was good. So they looked at three things. They looked at recidivism among people who were diverted into LEAD. People who are diverted into LEAD are 58% less likely to be rearrested than people who are routed through the criminal justice system as normal. And again, this is a harm reduction based program where no one is telling the person that they have to do anything, and yet their rates of rearrest and refiling on charges falls dramatically. That was actually, I have to admit, that was a surprise for a lot of us. We actually kind of thought that recidivism might be the same or even higher. What we were looking for was the cost savings, because we knew this was going to be way, way cheaper than the criminal justice system as normal. So when they came up with the recidivism evaluations, we actually said, you know what, we don't believe this. You got to go back and rerun these numbers. We made them rerun the numbers a couple of times. And we made them tweak all sorts of things that they did in there. And they still kept coming up with these results that were better, far better than drug court, far better than other types of alternative approaches that have been used out there. So that was the first one. And then the second evaluation that they did was the cost savings. And all they looked at was criminal justice. So they didn't look at healthcare savings, which are, I think, fairly dramatic. But they looked at the criminal justice savings. And to no one's surprise on that front, doing LEAD is significantly cheaper than using the criminal justice system as an intervention. And then the third thing that they looked at was sort of quality of life indicators, like housing and employment and things like that. So those definitely get better, for sure. But it's not as dramatic as some people would like. So one of the things that came out of that was I am really a qualitative type person, much more than I am a quantitative type person. And so I was really lucky to have teams of anthropology interns who worked with us over a 4-year period. And we did in-depth, open-ended qualitative interviews with people that had been diverted into LEAD. And we looked at a few things in there. One of the things we looked at was what was their relationship with police like before they came into LEAD. Almost uniformly, those relationships and impressions were very, very negative, where people would say, whenever I saw officer so-and-so, the officer that diverted them, I used to run and hide. Now I go up and I talk to him, and I thank him for putting me into the program. So we looked at relationships before and after, fundamentally quite different. And then what we also looked at was their opinion of LEAD versus other types of social service and treatment programs that they had been in. And whether they actually use the phrase harm reduction, because that's not a phrase that a lot of people out on the street know, that's what they were talking about. I set my alarm to warn me that my time is running out, and it just went on. So I will start wrapping things up here. So to cut to the chase on this, in terms of what we're doing, in terms of police officers, it turns out that if the only tool you give an officer is to arrest someone, they're going to do one of a couple of things. They're either not going to see the activity, or they're going to arrest the person for it. If they have the option of taking them to a hospital, which some places do, they might use that. But basically it's either ignore or arrest. Turns out if you give them another option that actually yields results that are important to them, which is this person who is a pain in my butt is no longer a pain in my butt. That's an outcome they like. And they are willing to embrace that and use that tool. And it turns out that policymakers who are heavily criticized for not doing enough are also really big fans of doing something that yields better results, especially if it might save them money. And the final thing I'll just say real quickly here is that when we were talking about doing LEAD in Seattle, the city council was facing the very real probability of having to build a new jail. And Seattle's a fairly liberal, fairly progressive place, and none of the city council members actually wanted to vote to authorize $125 million for a new jail. So they were really desperate to find a way out of that. And we gave them a policy-based way of reducing the jail population rather than just depending on random fluctuation. With that, I will end it, and we'll move on to the other speakers on the panel. And thank you.
First session.
Hello. Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Was that amazing?
Yes.
Yeah. So as you know, I'm a community justice activist and coordinator of Community Alliance on Prisons, working for 20 years on alternatives to incarceration. We love LEAD. We think community-based programs are much better than warehousing people. Smarter sentencing would be a much better deal than actually arresting people for low-level crimes, since 74% of our entire incarcerated population are in for Class C felonies or below. That is the lowest felony. So we are incarcerating loads of people who are shoplifters, people who have committed petty misdemeanors, and the largest population is pretrial. More than 50% of all our people are in for they haven't even been convicted. So that's crazy at $50,000 a year. There's lots of things that we can do, and I aim to make that happen.
That's right.
What we do right now is we send people to a prison, we break their spirit, and then we send people who feel broken back into our community, and then we blame them. What's wrong with them? We screwed them up, but it's their fault. We need to humanize, not criminalize. We need to realize that every person in our community is a human being, part of our family. We're one whole family. So CAP joined this new initiative called Community Justice Coalition. And there's a sign-up sheet at the literature table outside the Carnation Room. And it happened because the state refuses to actually have dialogue with the community. So the community just said, you know what? We're going to have our own. And we're going to invite people to come in. What do you think we should do? Should we just be incarcerating all these people? What should we do? So we had our first dialogue on Oahu in November, and it was packed, and it was all about the community. The state is talking about building a prison, bricks, mortar. The community is talking about people, and that's where I stay. As Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So I'm going to thank Chris. That was an awesome, awesome presentation. You're an amazing leader. And thank you for bringing us and working with Heather, who is now our leader.
Yes.
She's amazing. She brought together this whole group of people to work collaboratively to bring this program to Honolulu. This is a community-based initiative. This is not a top-down state thing. This is about us.
Right.
So today, I'm really humbled to be with this amazing panel. I started adding up all the years that all these amazing people have been working on amazing issues to help our community. There's like over 100 years worth of, experience, research, caring, love. I'm just blown away by these guys. So I'm gonna start, well, I'll just briefly, their bios are in your packet, but I'll just give you a little teaser. So Tracy Ryan, she's been advocating for trans women and sex workers for the past 20 years. Joy Rucker from Maui has decades of experience working and training on harm reduction all over the nation. Eddie Mercero has over 25 years of clinical experience in harm reduction and behavioral health. He's now the chief of ADAD. And Trisha Kajimura, who has worked on just about every social challenge that we face in her career, and now she is the director of Mental Health America, Hawaii. She also wrote an amazing piece that appeared on January 4th in Civil Beat, and I urge you to go look at that because it was really terrific. It was about the maps that a person is actually, a legislator is putting out to his community to identify the locations of people who are houseless. Really good to get the vigilante movement going, yeah. So, ready? So Tracy, we're gonna start with you. And the way I'm gonna do this, because I don't want it to be just talking heads, I want it to be kind of fun. So I'm gonna ask one question first, and every panelist has 5 minutes to talk about it. Then we're going to go into something that I call the lightning round.
All right.
And then each person has 1 minute to say, in the fewest words possible, how LEAD will help their constituents.
Did you say lead or weed?
Wrong panel. And then the next part of the lightning round is how you think LEAD is not going to be helpful to your community, and you have 1 minute to say for that. And then we'll end 5 minutes for each panelist to talk about solutions. What can we do? So Tracy, I'm going to start with you because you are the shyest person on this panel. How can a LEAD program help sex workers, and what other efforts are being tried?
Well,
Do you suggest?
let's be clear that unlike a mental health issue or an addiction or being homeless, sex work in and of itself does not necessarily need any type of intervention or assistance, although many sex workers may fall into any one of those categories. As we were told earlier, a lot of the people who are going through LEAD in Seattle, maybe sex workers, a lot of them are homeless. No, and not having a roof over your head is certainly an issue that you want to solve, and part of harm reduction is working with people to determine what their specific needs are on their side so that you're working together collaboratively. I think most people who don't have a roof over their heads could identify that as a need. A person with a mental health issue may not be as clear as being able to identify that as a need. Such a person might be out every night acting up, which is why we were told that this is a person who might be a pain in the ass on someone's beat who's a police officer, that they're creating disturbances that other people in the community are afraid of, because many people are afraid of people who are mentally ill, which is, they're not usually dangerous, but people who have all sorts of irrational fears. And many people are annoyed by certain behaviors, even though we may not consider them specifically criminal. There may be need for intervention and perhaps a referral to a case manager, rather than wasting the criminal justice's time with someone who's really not a danger and in need of being incarcerated. And then if we talk about, homeless people actually, and mental health and addiction. And addiction, again, as we heard from Carl this morning, being an addict in and of itself, or being a drug user, I should say, in and of itself, doesn't necessarily mean that you're a candidate for treatment. Maybe that you're on the road to becoming a candidate. That's possible. So when we talk about the LEAD program, the first portion is to understand that we have a criminal law that allows the police to arrest people for engaging in an illegal activity which is not in its essence criminal. Sex between consenting adults is perfectly legal. There's nothing wrong with it under the law until money changes hands, which means the law has nothing to do with the activity at all. It only has to do with the exchange of money. If there are specific issues with the individual who's engaging with that in that activity that might require social services, then that's appropriate. Otherwise, we've just encouraged the police to arrest people. Now, I'm very encouraged to hear that in the LEAD program up in Seattle, they're offering services without having to go and arrest people first. You see a problem, hey, I'm not going to arrest you, which it saves a lot of trouble. You don't have to do a sting operation, you have to do a bunch of other nonsense to offer services to somebody. And the fact that you're there with your uniform and your badge on means they're going to listen to you. They may not like what you're saying, but they will listen. The other thing that is a concern of mine is I feel that one of the things which makes LEAD successful in Seattle is people like this in being involved in it. If we have a program like this specifically that is referring people who are arrested for sex work, we need to make sure that the programs that they're referred to are ones we approve of. As many of you have heard or know, there is a very large cottage industry which has arisen in this country of rescue organizations to save people from sex trafficking. They're all over the place, they're all over the news. Almost all of them, from what I can see, are faith-based, although they do not publish that fact. You listen to the rhetoric, and it's very clear from listening to these people on television. Most of them are not real experts. They'll deal with the problem that was explained in our first plenary by Mr. Hart regarding an anecdote. They'll tell you a horror story, and then they'll generalize it. And then they'll put out their hand for the money. And there's so many of these organizations now, there's an enormous demand for more victims to justify their existence. And they've been able to influence law enforcement to start seeing everybody they arrest as a sex trafficking victim. So now HPD has a policy, a written policy, that if you're arrested for soliciting an act of prostitution, they're going to ask you if you're a sex trafficking victim. And then you may be referred to social services and not go to jail. Okay, so now that the police are saying, gee, we're seeing an awful lot of people who are arrested as sex trafficking victims. Excuse me? You've just given them the magic words to avoid going to jail. Mm-hmm. So that's not what we're trying to do when we're talking about LEAD. But it's problematic when you're setting people up to threaten them with arrest or go do something.
30 seconds.
Pardon me?
30 seconds.
Okay, so the bottom line from that is that stop with asking them if they're a sex trafficking victim and just offer a service. And make sure the service is one that is a harm reduction service that's going to work with them that we approve of.
Joy, how do you think a LEAD program would help your population?
Well, I was, when Chris was talking, I was thinking, not specifically for homeless people, but just how movements begin. And that, the harm reduction movement started from people that could not access services or care. And the buy-in came from the people that had to implement the laws or the policies or the consequences that they knew did not work. And so when Chris was talking, I was thinking about how really a movement starts with the people that are being impacted the most. So those are the people that are getting arrested, and those are the people that are arresting people because they see it's not working. And so when we look at like structural harm, and we look at the policies that are created in this country, as we go down, you see that the people that are actually doing the work are trying to figure out a different way to do it, because they understand it doesn't work, and that we are creating structural harm, that we're operating in a system that creates harm, it does not reduce harm. And so, we have to start figuring out ways to reduce harm on the level in which we're working, and that's how movements start. That's how this harm reduction movement started. And I think that I'm always for diversion. I don't believe in incarceration for nonviolent, for drug offenses. We don't rehabilitate people in this country. We lock them up and we put them in a system that has nothing about rehabilitation. And so even though we have programs within the system, they live within a system that doesn't support that kind of culture. And so for me, it's just really throwing money at something that we cannot change because the system itself is punishing. And so any kind of alternative that we can come up with to keep people out of that system, I think is a benefit. I do. I mean, because being incarcerated changes people. It changes who you are. And so the more times you get incarcerated, even if it's for minor offenses, it changes you. It eats away at your very soul and your spirit. And so you become a different person. So there's nothing about this system that is supporting, the humanness of what we're trying to live in a community that supports people to be healthy.
Eddie, oh, don't give me that look. What's she gonna say? What do you see as the advantages of bringing LEAD to Hawaii?
All kinds of advantages. First and foremost, like Joy was saying, it may not be the answer, but it's an answer to moving in the right direction, and that's why I support it. One of my, it didn't make any sense on paper for me to take this job, but it made sense from a social worker point of view. Social workers in the house. So for me, the reality is that for hundreds of years, this country has been trying to legislate morality. And LEAD is a step in the direction that I personally want us to go as a country, as a society, where we don't legislate morality. And those are the advantages that I would like to see happen and come to fruition.
Right on. Well, Tricia, how can a program like LEAD help the folks that you serve?
Sure. So I think one of the points that I want to start with is that mental health and mental illness encompasses a much larger spectrum. I mean, it affects all of us, it includes all of us, and LEAD will help a specific subpopulation within that, right? I mean, mental health is everyone. Mental illness affects everyone. So in Hawaii right now, homelessness is a huge visible issue. And I think that it's great timing for us to pilot a program like LEAD or to start a program like LEAD in Hawaii, because our elected officials are more likely to buy in now if there is the potential that it'll help with the homelessness situation. And that's very important because jail doesn't make anybody mentally healthier. Not only does it change people, as Joy said, but it also limits their opportunities after incarceration. So that's not going to help anything that we're trying to achieve. Chris mentioned 81% of the Seattle population, I think, the lead participants were homeless, right? And currently in Hawaii, the statistics that came out from HPD were that 16,000 arrests last year, 61% were for arrested for behavioral health issues, including addiction and intoxication. So we really have the chance to make a difference with the people that would be eligible for LEAD, and I think it's really important to work on that. And the other point I wanted to make is that, and this is not about the advantages, but part of like what my colleagues have been saying about the system that's not set up to help people, we're only making it worse. And the common thread, I believe, is poverty. And so it was very exciting to hear that one jurisdiction included poverty, because that is the key. If we're not preventing people from falling into these dire situations where they're on the street and acting out enough to get arrested, it's just going to keep happening, right? So we have programs to reduce these incidents, arrests, homelessness, all of this. We also need to be working on the prevention end. I'll stop there.
They're pretty amazing, yeah? We're so lucky. These are our people working with our community. So now we're going to go into the lightning round. So everyone has 1 minute to come up with the upsides to LEAD for your specific population in as few words possible. As an example, I'll give you an example from my piece, people in prison. So fewer arrests, less people in jail, a peaceful approach. Take it away. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll start, even though I'm not really prepared. I only have a minute.
It's really the few words that's getting you.
Yeah, well, I want to keep people from getting the criminal record and the criminal conviction. That's important. And I think that if we can sell this as a way where we are reducing property crime, that's what the community cares about. And I'll tell you why. You ask somebody about the drug policy, an ordinary citizen or a group of people in our house who have got opinions. And you say, which is more important to you? Which would be the law enforcement priority? Keeping drug addicts from getting their hands on drugs, or keeping drug addicts from getting their hands on your property? Duh. And most of these policies lead into other crimes. And the other crimes are not as forgivable. I mean, I don't care if somebody is on my corner using drugs, but if they break into my house, then I care. People care. So we have to be able to show that this is a policy that works for everybody, and is not just good for the addict or the sex worker, but it's good for the whole community. Then it's going to sell and it's going to work.
Good. Joy.
I guess, like Tracy, I feel like, it's one less thing for a background check or when you want to apply for a rental space that's going to come up on your credit report or any kind of background check that landlords do. And, it doesn't matter what the crime is, it's just the fact that you got arrested, that indicates in some people's minds that you're more of a risk than someone with a clean record. So I think, I'm all for and alternatives and options, So the more alternatives that we can come up with to keep people from having to continue to pay a price for a thing they did on Thursday and continue to pay the price next year but, you know, and they're not even doing the same thing, I'm all for it.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because one of my big issues with reporters is when you read a story in the paper and it says, this guy has had 19 arrests, and then you read the comments and they're like, oh my God, we need the death penalty. And it's like, this person hasn't been convicted, these are arrests. It's just, it sends that message, kind of what Dr. Hart was saying this morning, anecdotal as opposed to empirical. So the anecdotal stuff is what flies, compassionate, conservative, those kinds of things. I mean, did you ever meet one? I didn't. But anyway, Eddie?
Ditto to everything that Tracy and Joy said already, but I have three things, and they go back a little bit to what Chris was talking about. First and foremost, for me, LEAD has the potential to bring people from opposite sides of the spectrum to the table, and to make them allies to address a situation or an issue in our society that is really everybody's issue, and it's not, and you know, we can have different opinions about how it should be treated and how it should be addressed or whatever, but the reality is until we all come to the table, we're just going to keep spinning our wheels. And when Chris talks about how law enforcement started coming up with those ideas and saying, we want to bring these ideas to the table and we want to do these things to help people, it gives me a lot of hope, because I believe, and you know, I don't think it's everybody, but I believe that in general, law enforcement just doesn't know what to do, and they don't have any options. And if they're given options that work within the framework that they have, they're going to be all over it. And so that's the potential. The second thing is that, again, it takes us to a place where, from a systems perspective, we're addressing the behavioral and choice issues that people make, not from a place of judgment or it's right or wrong, good or bad, but from what are the public safety, public health issues that we can all address that takes the personalities out of it. And I forgot the third one.
That was really good though, Eddie. Trish?
Okay, just to build on, in addition to what everyone has said, I think that this initiative of starting LEAD in Hawaii is giving us an opportunity to create a discussion around these issues and show that there is a way of dealing with behavior that is more compassionate, and actually I think it's common sense, but we sometimes need a reason to talk about this. And can you imagine if it goes statewide, how much that will improve the discussion around addiction and mental illness, chronic homelessness. So I think there's a lot of potential to change the public narrative around these issues.
That was my third one.
See, you're all connected. Well, Chris, do you have something you'd like to chime in on?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on several of the comments that people have made here, and just to sort of throw this into the mix, and it's not really directly answering your thing, but just sort of following up real quickly.
Oh, mix it up.
Which is that we don't talk about this really with the police and the prosecutors that much, but we look at LEAD as its impact to date as de facto decriminalization. And the beauty of it is that you can get there without having to change any laws, that those laws are still all in the books. But police and prosecutors all have the power to change practice. They do not have to arrest people. Police often don't arrest people, right? Not everyone they stop gets a ticket. What we want them to do is to just stop doing this for everybody, not just for people that they like. And this gets to the point, but Eddie's point about system reform is that if we are in this room 10 years from now talking about LEAD, that's not a success from our point of view. LEAD is a stepping stone to get us to the point where we can have an open, honest conversation with people who pass laws about getting these laws off the books.
Oh, that's awesome. I that. So our next piece is, okay, so now we know that we have some strategies that we can use. LEAD is one of them. What do you think we can do to solve some of the challenges that face us?
You just changed it up. You were going to have us a minute saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't do the downside. Bad facilitator. Anyway, all right, I will discipline myself later.
No need for that.
Okay. All right, so now, what you think the downsides of LEAD might be for the people that you serve? Thank you, Tracy.
The biggest potential downside is that we, in the harm reduction, will lose control of it, and it will be turned over to people who have financial interests or moral interests in pushing an agenda. And I spoke earlier about the rescue industry and the faith-based groups, and the extent to which, since the beginning of the Bush administration, harm reductionists and professional social workers have been struggling for funding, while faith-based groups, many of them are well-intentioned, but often they don't have an appropriate background in what they're doing. People are, particularly in sex work, people are sent to be rescued, and all the people know what to do with them is to pray with them. I mean, that's it. They'll give them a room, they might think of job training, and they pray, and they have no real understanding of what these people's needs are. We had our best practices thing today, largely in response to this growing thing. And these are the people getting all the publicity. They're marching around, they're on the news, they're putting out their information, and nobody's listening to us. So we have to make sure if we have a LEAD program, that it's a program that's designed and controlled by the harm reduction community. Otherwise, it can be a mess. That's a minute.
You got it. Joy?
Yeah, I agree with Chris. If we're still talking about this as a program, I think that's what, I've seen so many alternatives, put forth, but if we, like the downsides is that it'll continue to stay a program instead of a system change.
Yes. Good, keep banging on that, Joy, that's really important. Eddie?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. From my perspective, for any solution that we try, there's going to be some downsides, and there's going to be dangers, and there's going to be potential hazards and pitfalls.
Sorry, you can't hear me? I'm just talking to myself right now.
It's okay, I even answer myself too, so that's okay. Just agreeing with them, but I think, again, I think Chris stated it very articulately. If we're talking about this in 10 years, we've done something wrong. And the other part of it, from my perspective, is a big downfall is that LEAD will become, or a potential downfall, and one thing that I don't want to see happen is that not only that it gets politicized or that people kind of take over or whatever, but that it becomes the solution du jour. And that everybody's all focused on doing LEAD, and that's all we're going to focus on and all that kind of stuff. And the social worker in me thinks takes the systems perspective and recognizes that this is just one component of a bigger picture, and we can't use any solution no matter how good the stats are. And Chris, your stats are awesome. That's why I'm so excited about it. But if we use any solution, no matter how good the stats are and the outcomes are, as the silver bullet, we're still doing something wrong. We need a shotgun approach because these are complex issues and we need complex solutions.
So to add to that, I want to make sure that if we put a diversion program into place, a program that's a movement that's going to be part of the system, that we have services available for people to enter that will work with them, right? They need to be harm reduction programs. We need the intake, whoever's doing the intake, to be someone that can engage the participants. So all of that is, we're already always working on increasing services for mental health and for addiction, and that work needs to continue and needs to be closely linked with this effort. I also just want to make sure that as a community, we don't limit the conversation to the people that are most visible, and that we make sure we're looking at the needs of everyone.
Thank you guys, because you have really nailed it. So we have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to give everybody, wait, 5 minutes? Everybody 1 minute to say, what kind of solutions can we come up with now? I mean, we're working to bring lead here, what can we do now?
All right, I think we have more than 5 minutes, but that's okay.
Sorry, my boss just said 5 and I...
Well, I think that the people who are working on bringing lead here are doing a good job, and I think if they need help from the community, they have everyone's contact information and they can ask for it. I think that for all of us, though, all of us have to have some sort of political conscience, and that goes beyond voting or supporting progressive causes. It means standing up for your organization when it needs standing up for with the legislature, with the media, etc. We don't want to reach the point where we're all Howard Veal, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And I know a lot of you feel that way. I have put out on the community table, and I hope everybody visits the community table and picks something up. Several pieces
Outside the Carnation Room.
Yes, several pieces of draft legislation. There's a bill, I think we've taken all of the bills for the, which would completely legalize marijuana. I think those are all gone, but you can ask for more. I have my cards there. We have a bill to clean up the felonies, which were slipped into the dispensary bill that most people don't even know about. A whole bunch of new felonies got slided in with a popular bill. People in the legislature didn't even know it. And I have 3 bills to reform our criminal prostitution laws, which I think are all valuable. And if it's about numbers in politics, the people on the other side of our issues, they're down there at the Capitol. We're not. Think about it.
Thank you, Tracy. Joy?
You know, in Black Lives Matter movement, they have a quote that says, "Stay woke."
Yep.
You know? And so we need to stay woke. You're in this room, you got the message, stay woke.
That's right.
Don't go to sleep. Don't leave here and go back to your nice little lives, because, you know, most of us have nice little lives. And then the only time we think about these issues is when we're at work with the people sitting in front of us. You know? It's like talk to your family members that are not woke, that don't understand, you know, the cross system, the system changes that have to happen, because I don't believe it impacts all of us. Like somebody else said here, it does not impact my entire community. It only impacts the people who are poor and without resources. And the other people that are part of the larger community still consider the rest of the people as those people. So we have not had the conversation at a structural level where it makes sense for the entire community to feel the pain that poverty and crime and criminalization and homelessness has to bear on the people that we're working with. So, you know, again, I want to say, just stay woke.
Right.
Eddie or Trish or Eddie, whatever. You sound like a Trish
I
and
totally
Eddie.
agree. 100% agree. Stay woke. Understand that you guys are the policymakers, not the people at the state capitol. They have a big role. They have an important role. But you and I are the policymakers, and we need to kind of mobilize ourselves in that. And I just go back to what my aunt, saying that my auntie taught me, unite to move forward. We don't have to agree on every little facet of how we do this, but we got to get together. We got to have one united voice, and we have to put the principles before the personalities in terms of getting this done. Thank you.
Nice.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
LEAD getting started in Hawaii. We have a great hui that's very well organized and under the awesome leadership of Heather Lasketch. And your organization isn't part of that hui and you're interested, I suggest that you talk to Heather. I hope it's okay for me to say that. And then to back up or take like a much farther view and perhaps unexpected in this setting, what I would encourage you to do is take a look at economic justice issues, get involved with Hawaii Appleseed Center and the economic justice package that they are looking at, and tax reform, because poverty is at the root of a lot of this. And as a state, we need to make a difference in that area. A lot of things that we're trying to do, I don't want to say Band-Aid, but we need to get at the root, and poverty is one of the huge root issues, and our legislators need to listen to us on that. So that would be my closing message, is to look at what Hawaii Appleseed is doing, because they're the best organized and vocal about it, and you can get that information in one place on their website.
Nice.
And thank you. What a terrific audience you are, and these guys are just so amazing. We are so lucky because you are the resources in Hawaii, and you're the ones that are going to actually bring aloha. No, we all are going to bring aloha. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so it's 3:15. Your agenda says that the workshops are starting at 3:20. We'll actually start at 3:25, just to give folks a 10-minute break to get there. We are not reconvening here, so that is it. We'll be done with at the breakout session, but again, encourage you to come to the Pauhana with Dr. Carl Hart in the Alima room at 5 p.m. Also, again, your feedback is so important to us.
Yeah.
We actually Tracy writes this amazing post-evaluation report, and we use that data to do our programming for the next session. So again, to entice you, we have our awesome Humanize Not Criminalize stickers that you will get when you turn in your evaluation. And then lastly, CEUs, do please sign out. And we do have parking validation. I lied in my email to you, so I apologize about that. In case you parked here, we do have some parking validation that will dramatically lower your fee if you park at the hotel. So see you at the breakout sessions in 10 minutes. Thanks, everybody.